Hey everybody, apologies. We're having a few technical difficulties here, so I just want to make sure that the stream is working. One second. All right, it looks like we are live, so awesome. Hey everybody, welcome to the GMI Rocket Show. Apologies for that little technical difficulty. So welcome to the GMI Rocket Show. Um, I'm your host, Roman Zelechenko, former immigration lawyer turned entrepreneur. I am the founder of Laborless, an immigration tech company that automates H-1B visa compliance, and also the founder of GMI Rocket, which is a digital marketing agency that brings you this show. Today's episode 111, which is, still crazy for me to think about. I read recently that most podcasts don't go beyond like 10 or something episodes. So the fact that, this show has continued on and people continue to come on and share their story like today is just it's really awesome. And I think also shows that immigration tech continues to grow. So today's guest is Bisi Obateru, who is the founder and CEO of a company called JustiGuide. So JustiGuide is an immigration tech company, really kind of meant to service lawyers, immigration lawyers, to help them with various immigration forms and processes. It's sort of built with AI at its core. So, it's a sort of the next evolution, if you will, of the kind of immigration case management, or I guess immigration tools that exist in the market today. And, it's exciting because AI is such an important part of where the practice is going. And it's cool to see how some companies are adding AI as features, others are building with AI, at its core from the ground up. So excited to learn about VC's journey and, of course, what the company is doing today. Before we get started, I want to thank the main sponsor of this episode, which is DocketWise. I mean, DocketWise is, the biggest or one of the biggest immigration case management platforms. They provide all-in-one immigration case management with forms, customizable questionnaires, industry-leading integrations with all sorts of different products, including Laborless, which is my software. They're actually the first company to have an open API within the immigration space, which is really awesome. DocketWise also creates great content and really supports the immigration industry. So they have a blog, they have webinars, they have a new podcast with their co-founder, James Pittman, interviewing all sorts of wonderful guests. They have an ebook. Great company that does a lot of work supporting the industry. Obviously, they support the show, which I think is really valuable. So really excited about DocketWise. Check them out. You can visit docketwise.com to learn more, or use the link in the show notes to check them out. So without further ado, I want to bring in today's guest, Bisi. Thank you so much for being here, and excited to learn about you and learn about what you're building, what you guys are building at JustiGuide.
Hey, Roman, thank you so much. And apologies for the technical difficulties, y'all. The day that you expect technology to work well is, of course, the day that all the updates want to happen. So thank you for having me. And thank you also for creating a space for this conversation, because I think immigration tech, is such an inspiring space. It's really like where technology and human really collaboration and connection begin. It's a very interesting topic to me as an urban planner, and very excited the journey that this company and just the world, the excitement around this space is also just so inspiring. So thanks for having me, Roman, and thanks for making this happen.
No, of course. And, we talked about this when we were prepping for the episode. I think it's actually really interesting. I mean, we're going to get into all the topics, but I think it's interesting that your background is in urban planning, because it's somewhat different, from what most of the guests that I've had on the show. But then more importantly, from somebody who's building software, and we'll talk about where there is an overlap, but somebody who's building software that enables people to move, you're actually coming at it first and foremost from an education standpoint, from the perspective of the place that receives people, or the place that actually handles the movement of people physically, i.e., a
Yeah.
city or a town or a place. So I think that's really interesting. But I want to start further back because, to me, what's interesting about the show is learning about the guest, learning about their background. When they have an immigration story, obviously learning about their immigration story. So you have your own immigration story, right? You were born in Lagos,
Mhm.
Nigeria, and I know you grew up there. You ended up studying in the U.S. But can you talk a little bit about, I don't know, I guess, what was it like for you growing up in Lagos? Were you surrounded by either lawyers or, technology people, entrepreneurs in your family or your friend? I mean, circle. What was that like for you?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. My origin story, I was actually born in the north. I was born in Jos, and we moved to Lagos when I was about 3. When I moved to Lagos, General Sani Abacha was in office, so we had a general, a dictator, and that was probably the scariest time to be growing up in Nigeria. This is one of those dictators that if you said anything, wrong, you would get executed. So there was this general vibe in Lagos at the time of just fear, like, be careful who you're walking around and so I grew up with that. And so I want to highlight that because to grow up with such concern of the people around you and the inability to express yourself was a different thing, and to come to the US and see a different version of that where you can be fully expressed, right? And so imagine my feeling for any immigrant who's running away from that and wanting to find their freedom and the way that they're met. So it's really informed the way that I think about this conversation around global mobility. But yeah, I grew up with my mom was a teacher. She taught at the upper secondary school and became a supervisor and an educational planner. My dad worked for the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation as a general manager by the time he was retiring, but he was really a PR person. So I grew up with that awareness too of Nigeria as an oil producing country, and that had its effect on the economy. But those were the conversations I was around, with my dad working in that capacity and working with ministers, and my mom very on the ground and working in the education space. So they were big influences on me. And my mom is very entrepreneurial, so she always had some other project. And they were both really big believers into church, and the extended family. So I grew up with a lot of aunts and uncles, so multi-generational. And that never left our home. We always had room for an uncle and auntie. And so we grew up with multiple adults in the house, and that's also very informed me and the way that I socialize and relate to people.
That's really cool. Also, I love, I didn't grow up with, both my parents were professionals as I was growing up, but a side hustle was never really kind of in our, I don't know, it wasn't in our conversation. And it's just interesting because I imagine what it's like to grow up around, your parents. They're obviously both professionals. They had their careers, they had their jobs, but then, like you said, your mom was always doing something on the side. And I feel like now that would have been so cool to see because it would have sort of inspired me to, maybe it would have inspired me to start my own business earlier. Or actually, take steps in that direction. I'm just curious if you remember what were some of the things that your mom was doing? Was it like, small time, like buying, selling stuff or baking things for people? Like, do you remember? I'm just
Yeah,
genuinely curious what
yeah.
kind of side projects she had.
I would say my mom is the person who put this problem solver mentality into my brain. My Because my dad always worked in the corporate space, and he also has his interest in real estate. So my dad, like, his big thing on the side was real estate. And for my mom, it was always, what can I do to meet the need of the community around us? So we had a retail store, and then when we moved to our first house, they like built a cold room so that they could sell water because we had the well in our house and most of that street didn't. So we had this like cold room to like freeze like multiple cases of water, and we could just give that to people in the community. And then one time she bought like a lot of sewing machines and like, gave that to people so that they can use that for businesses. So it was always this like, how do we meet the need of the community? And to me that was always an interesting approach, because everywhere we went it was, how do we meet the need of the community? So I think that really informed my in like building social impactful businesses,
I love that.
as you know.
I love that because I think, I always think about this. There are some people that, to your point, it's just part of their DNA. I mean, they see a problem and they want to solve it. And I see some of those people that actually moved to New York City.
Mm,
And I grew up here, right? I mean, I wasn't born here, but we moved here when I was 2.5 years old. So
okay.
most of my life that I can remember is in New York. And I really admire people who that have that drive. And there's so many people that move to New York City, of course, later in life. And some of these people, they might see an issue with their neighborhood and they just go out and solve it. And they didn't grow up here, they don't know their neighbors, they don't know, but they see a problem and they solve it. And it's always funny to see those people and then watch the reaction of the folks who have lived here, for a very long time that have never, not that they're bad people, but it's not in their nature to sort of, you know, do social impact work, even if it's for their little neighborhood. And so it's really cool to see people who do that. It's very inspiring, actually. So
Yeah, and immigrants naturally do that,
yeah.
surprisingly, right? Like there was a report that came out last year on just the impact of immigrants on housing, and it was just that like they don't call the landlord ever. Once they move, they just keep fixing the property, and then
Mm.
the landlord ends up with a better house than they than they rented it out to those newcomers who just take ownership. Where's your family from, Roman?
So I was born in Ukraine, and so my family
Oh,
left in 1990.
okay.
Well, 1989 we left. So the Soviet Union fell, and then we all kind of we left. And so yeah, we
Mm,
moved here. There's a huge wave of post-Soviet sort of immigrants around that time.
yeah.
But
Which
I
had
grew
a
up. Yeah.
no, which had a significant impact on the amount of patents that were filed the years to come on engineering, on mathematics.
Sure. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and
There's a
so yeah, it's so fascinating. I love history for that because I think when people talk the general conversation around immigration today will often make it feel like, oh, all these people are coming. But history tells us it's so much value, it's like a gift that keeps on giving. So how we've lost that conversation or that relevance is always a surprise to
Yeah,
me.
definitely. Well, I'll put it to you this way. I see a lot of people who come and benefit from and are really grateful for the immigration system in the US, but then are quick to turn around and sort of close the door behind them. And it's not because they're bad people. It just, it's easy once, I mean, I don't know what all of the reasons are, of course, but I think partly psychologically, once you get used to the comfort, America is a very comfortable country. I mean, no matter what you say, it has its issues, of course. But overall, the standard of living in the US is quite high for a large number of people. And I feel like once people get settled in and sort of like forget about the struggles that they went through because now they're focused on themselves, their growth, their career, saving money, buying a house, whatever it is. I think part of it is that it's easy to forget, you know, how people helped them when they arrived, how people maybe didn't want them to be here as well when they
Yeah.
arrived, but then they kind of worked through it and have proven themselves in a way, but then forgot about that feeling as well. So I don't know, but this is why we're doing what we do, right? We continue the
Totally.
conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I want to move it back to you. So you grew up you eventually grew up in Lagos. You had this professional, your parents were professionals, and surely there was emphasis on education, but also clearly on kind of social impact work. You eventually came to the U.S. to study for university, right? You came on an
Yeah.
F1
Yeah, I
visa.
was a chemical engineering student for a long time. So when people asked about my engineering background, it really starts with the fact that, in Nigeria, once you're in secondary one, which is, I would say, maybe equivalent to 10th grade, you
Yeah.
choose a path, art, science, or business, at least in my school. And so I was basically a science major. I did architectural drawings, physics, chemistry, like those, even though it's feels like a long time ago, but that's the way that I learned to approach problems. So I was a trained scientist or engineer, and then changed that engineering focus to a broader frame, which is urban planning, and you study everything in urban planning, from waste to transportation to air. And so systems became very exciting to me because as a kid I used to make my own world. I made toys out of paper clips and helicopters out of cartons and rotors from broken cars. So like I think systems have always been interesting to me, from that context.
What was your experience at that time going through the immigration system? I mean, you came on an
Ooh.
F1 student visa, and whether it's the actual application of the visa or even just settling in when you finally arrived. What do you remember about that process?
Yeah, and thank you for asking that. I laugh because it just was so, like, when I think about what is available today and when I think about what we're building today, I'm excited for the next wave of immigrants because for me, I remember I'll start the journey from when I was back home. I'm in secondary two, so it's the 11th grade, and my dad is like, "You need a better education. Where are you gonna go? Canada or the US?" I'm like, "Okay, I think the US is gonna be cool." He gives me these two textbooks. He's like, choose where you're gonna go. And I'm just like reading about each school of the CSU system. I'm like, okay, Chico, that sounds like a cool name, you know. Oh, wow, Fresno. That sounds cool. And I'm like, oh, a good engineering program, check. Okay, great. Apply to those two schools, like that's how I literally chose the places I wanted to go to.
Hmm.
And I called a family friend, of course, to learn that those two places are probably not where I want to end up. He was like, "You should probably move to Sacramento instead of Fresno." So that was the first step, was making this choice and then getting better information and then starting to figure out how to transfer my I-20, which is what that's the service that basically you get as an F1 student that guarantees your connection to that education, that institute of education. So then, of course, I make it to Sacramento. 17 hours later, stopping from New York to Vegas and then Sacramento. I get Sacramento, and again, it's just like, okay, I'm gonna go to school. I go to the school. I check in, and after a year, I actually started working on campus in the international students department. So I was helping other students arrive and welcome them, and then I would say, to summarize, it was always just kind of like doing what I could. There was not that much information, and I would always just rely on the DSO, the designated school official. And as an F1, the rules are simple. You always have to have 12 units. You don't really have access to that many, financial support. So I was working, and you always have to, like, inform your teacher or your DSO if you're going to travel. But that's it. It's very limited. It's very strict, and you have to kind of do all of that. The transition from then, of course, like transferring to San Francisco to study urban planning, trying to all my friends leaving who were exchange students, going back to their home countries, starting to finally feel like the new person in a place that I've kind of lived for a while, but still felt like I had not integrated to that community. Those were the things that are kind of informing the products that we're building today for immigrants, right? It's that, like, housing, right? Once you're no longer dependent on student housing, what's that process like? Craigslist, you have access to it, bank accounts. How do you transition if you're not going to go the formal route? Back then I didn't have things like Unshackled Ventures, like, the internet was just emerging. So this idea of how to do all of the things I was doing was just like me just trying it and talking to people. And oftentimes a lot of people who are American didn't really understand the F1 process. So I would get advice on things that, like I was building websites because I was just doing that as like an addition to something I was learning. But like, I didn't formalize it as an LLC. It was just kind of like a thing I was doing for some friends, and so they were just things that I felt like with more information I could have done with a little bit more structure. But I think ultimately all of that guidance, and I think we lived in an era. I think back in the day when we just had cars, people didn't even have seatbelts, right? So that I think we had this grace period of like, we're figuring it out. And now we're getting to that place in the information era where the information is accessible. So how do you bring everybody up to that level where the information is accessible to them and can be useful to them in a way that can propel them to make better decisions about their lives. And that's what informed Relo. And that's the relocation engine that we built at JustiGuide and launched in May, which helped immigrants figure out where the best place to relocate to when they're fleeing danger or when there's an incident where they have to move quickly. So based on visa wait times, labor statistics, global, that we're able to suggest the best place for them to start again. And that basically has kept on evolving for us as we built the product. And it's basically my life experience as an immigrant. It's like, okay, when I was looking for lawyers, I definitely didn't have lawyers, back home. I was not reaching to websites, and I didn't really have that many people to call. So we gave those features on our Relo platform. Like, you can get questions, we can answer you in 30 languages, we can help you and connect you to a lawyer. You can, with a subscription, you can have unlimited consultations with the lawyers. We can help you fill your forms. We can help you know which immigration forms you need. And all of this is information that is already publicly available. We're just making it accessible to you in a way that you can question and kind of query it, right, to make it make sense for you, which oftentimes that's what you lose out on just giving the information or putting it on a PDF.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and of course, and this could be the difference between software that's built from the ground up with AI, that not only is easy to use, but also has the world's information at its fingertips versus more static software. But before we get to that, I think I'm curious about, from your perspective, you graduated, and the F1 process is relatively straightforward. I mean, I've never gone through it, but from everyone I've talked to, while yes, it's not simple, you're moving to a new country, you're trying to navigate, laws and restrictions, as you said, for you as an F1 student. There's still pretty decent support, right, from the university,
School.
from your DSO, from the office, etc. You graduate, okay, you have OPT, I suppose. So, but the school isn't really going to continue to support you from an immigration standpoint. Of course, you're now on your own. So I know you had a quite interesting, you tried different visa types, et cetera. Can you just briefly talk about that a little bit? I want to share this because, number one, I think it's fascinating, and number two, I think it does inform, as you've been saying, your frustration with the process, because you clearly, I mean, you knew what you were doing. You were trying as much as possible to learn about the immigration process, and still it was a challenge.
Yeah.
So can you share a little bit about kind of what were the visa types you went for, and how did that pan out for you?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing, to your point, right? You get the DSO, and the thing with people who are bound by regulation to give you information is it's very rigid, right? So this is the path. If you don't do it this way, there's not really trying to explore the gray areas with you, right? So for me, I got an internship with Architecture for Humanity. I was excited. I was doing impactful work. Architecture for Humanity was a nonprofit that was building infrastructure as soon as something major happened, like a monsoon or earthquake. They would build the schools, the hospitals, those type of things. I really was excited about that internship role, and I thought it was going to lead to a full-time job. But very quickly, I was learning that it's a nonprofit, and they were not necessarily hiring locally. They had internet, like at the time, I think there was like a big thing going on in Japan. So they were hiring designers in Japan, but not locally in San Francisco. So when that happened, I also coincidentally had a demo that I recorded with a friend that was getting popular in Ireland. It was called the U Blue Music Awards. So in 2012, at the age of 22, my very first demo was a semi-finalist. So all of a sudden, I had two paths. And I was like, okay, if I'm not going to get a job, maybe I'll start with the O1 approach. But, U Blue Music Awards, that was its first year. It was not big enough. And I didn't know if I qualified, and I had not been written about. Like, I only had two songs, I was the music deputy music lead for our school club. So I'd not, it was never the strategy. So I'd not built up the case. So when that journey started, it will almost come together 4 years later from when I started on it. But it was just taking too much time because each thing I had to do to get there, get written about, I eventually did. I think I did a street performance that the San Francisco Chronicle wrote about at that time with my band. So some things were coming together, but it was taking longer and longer. And I was lucky that with the F1, you have like 26 months or 24 months or something like that. So you're not really out of status yet after graduation because there's some room to apply for school again and things like that. So I was lucky in that way that I didn't feel like I was doing anything wrong while exploring this potential and still taking classes here and there. But at some point it started to feel that way, because you're like, okay, I haven't submitted this thing. Here I am. I'm waking up every day to try and get documentation to file for this thing under the umbrella that I'm still a student. But the moment this runs out, what happens? And 2 years after graduation, I was lucky. I worked with Notes for Notes, and I was living in Maui. Got a song on the radio there, and to me, that was like, okay, now I have a song on the radio. I'm submitting this thing. Like, I think I have everything I need for an O1. And just right then, I got this job with Notes for Notes, which is a nonprofit with the H-1B cap exempt. So that kind of resolved all of the work that I've been doing for 3 to 4 years, trying to, get this status as an extraordinary person, an artist, to then working with Notes for Notes for about a year and 6 months, which was also a very fulfilling part of my life because it kind of took me away from this traditional thing, which was my urban planning and those visions, and really worked with youth and building educational programs for youth and actually focusing on my passion for music and building music studios and the Boys and Girls Club and just producing records for ages 5 to 18, and it was a really joyful moment. It actually was it was so important for me to have that moment, to be honest, because it was it's daunting when you don't have a status and when you're feeling like this is stressful. Like, I really have to find a way to be able to make money and all of that. And so I really needed that break, and it came at the right time. And to be surrounded by children who are so happy to see you, so excited about the opportunity to learn, it really, I don't know, it met me at the right time. But I definitely know that those 2, 3 years, it was just stressful. You're just stressed. You really want to make something happen, but there's all this, and I didn't have I was also very afraid of talking about it. There's always that feeling of, if I tell somebody, does this mean I could get reported to ICE? And there was also always that concern and it's weird, but it really makes you feel like an outsider and like you don't belong. You feel like you don't have a status. And I very much empathize with people who go through that experience. It's very challenging. And I hope that with our product that people feel that at least they can, start that conversation with a technology that is not going to judge them, and like they can basically strategize and connect to lawyers in a way that feels confidential. And at the core, I just want to say this because I get this question all the time. At the core of our engine is privacy. Like, we're implementing federated processing. So that means anything that you upload onto our platform is anonymized, and it's encrypted. It's stored on your local engine, and between you and the lawyer can exchange keys to see it on each other's local engines, but we don't store any of that. So privacy, and we're starting to think through some compute security as well. So we are thinking about every aspect of people's privacy and people's humanity and integrity as we build this technology as well.
Yeah, it's important because when you're sharing, especially through a software platform, if it's chat or email or whatever, when you're sharing your aspects of your immigration case, you're by nature you're sharing um, private,
Sensitive, yeah.
for sensitive information about your history, about your family, especially if you are, you going through asylum process or something, or I mean, depending on the visa type, you might be sharing kind of really painful information. And
Totally.
so I think I just think that's really important to keep in mind. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah, confidential compute is like the next thing that we're going to implement for the immigrant side.
We got a comment here from a live comment here from Balaji Muhammad, who says, "Great work, Bisi Obateru. I commend your initiative." So thank you, Balaji, for
Oh,
that note.
thank you, Balaji.
I appreciate
That's another Yoruba
that.
Nigerian man for sure.
I wanted to ask you because so I know you great that you got this H-1B cap exempt. I mean, what a gift, right? Because the cap H-1B cap is a whole nother. It is a headache, and I mean, and I say this as somebody who's our software automates H-1B compliance, so we're dealing with lawyers now who are working on cap cases around the year. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your company, because so far you've been, I get that you have this sort of professional background, and then you explored music, which you obviously are talented, and you were getting success. But in part, it sounds like you saw that as well as a way to get into the, to stay in the U.S., right? I mean, you're doing both, so why not pursue the music thing and see if you can get an O1? You eventually got the H-1B. It seems like, combined your two passions. You started a company called Soundcheck, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about what that company was? What were you able to do with it, et cetera? Because obviously you have entrepreneurial instincts inside of you. It sounds like that was your first kind of, let's make this official. It's a company. I'm the founder. Tell me a little bit about that company, what that was all about.
Yeah, so interesting about Soundcheck is that the first iteration of Soundcheck, because as an entrepreneur, you kind of always are thinking about different solutions, and then eventually something happens, and then it feels like, oh, exactly, that's how it should be. So the beginning of Soundcheck is actually emerged from the Market Street Prototyping Festival. It was the first time in San Francisco that we wanted to finally make urban planning participatory, and we had this initiative from the Better Market Street plan. It was a way to kind of reactivate the mid Market Street, which is, if anybody knows, in San Francisco, there's a long street market that goes all the way to the Ferry Building, and that's basically where the city began, and it's slowly grown out west and south. So interestingly enough, when we were renovating BART in the 60s, something happens in mid market, and it never really recovered. And so this initiative was from urban planners and designers. Was They called artists, they called community members, how can we make this place better? And one of the solutions that I offered was to kind of bring live music to those corridors and like have people performing there, like make it walkable. I'm a big fan of Jane Jacobs. She writes a critique of the American society, which was like a critique of Robert Moses in New York. And some of the things that she really highlights were just things that I generally, as a person, gravitate to. I love walking streets. When I, got that semifinalist opportunity, I started busking on Haight Street to write more songs, which is how I met my bandmate. And I got to know everybody on that street. I became part of the street. And so that story for me was, hey, let's give people that opportunity. Life is about, me seeing people, knowing the person next to you, saying hello. And so that I pitched and got the community to support me. I think Airbnb gave us an office at that time. So we were doing meetings and starting to build out this amazing stage that basically the problem we were solving is make it easy for a show to happen spontaneously on the street. Put some awesome art, put some speakers there. All the artist has to do is show up with their instrument, plug in, and give the people an amazing show. And any street corner can become a stage. And so it was called Our City Stage. It didn't end up getting picked, but I tabled that idea. So fast forward, after leaving Notes for Notes, it became clear to me that, oh, I want to go back and build something for the artist community. Like, let me now I have more chops. I understand I can do more better drawings. I become more artistic, more creative. Let's do something. So the idea for Soundcheck actually didn't immediately incorporate Our City Stage, but what I was trying to solve was the solution that we had provided to the youth, which is building music studios for the youth. In the music business, a lot of the record labels were offering would buy studio time. But when those record labels were not there, artists were no longer using music studios, because now you can just buy your your MIDI controller for $100 and $200 or sound card, and then you're recording at home. So there was this kind of exodus from the music studio, and I was like, wow, but you have like $8,000 mics. Like, do you know how nice it would be to actually go back and record on that? So basically what I was building was a marketplace where artists can buy studio time for cheaper than the price. And that we experimented with on just like a platform where people could sign up, and then partnerships with the music studios. And yeah, we generated almost 8 grand in revenue for our pilot studios in San Francisco. And then we were going to launch in January. And, by January, we were doing some technical stuff, but COVID happens in 2020, and that idea gets shut down.
Yeah, that's like the opposite of COVID, asking people
Exactly.
to come into a space. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. It's and marketplaces, by the way, are pretty tough to build, right? Because you have to supply both sides, the studios, and then of course the talent that wants to use those studios. But so if I can ask you, as you kind of have navigated away from that project or that business, what do you think you took away from that? Like, what did you learn during that process that you think has been helping you with building JustiGuide now?
Absolutely. I mean, it's very much a similar thing, right? It's a marketplace in some ways, because we built a product to test an idea. So I think everything about JustiGuide is, what have I learned in the past, 14 years, to make better technology, to make better systems. And Relo is an example of that. I learned from the first bad engineering hire that it's better to test out the idea quickly than wait for months for this person to deploy code. So at JustiGuide, we were deploying code every week. And we were like, oh, what about this idea? Okay, let's give it to users and see. And when we launched Relo, the visa wait time aspect, we got, 7,000 people from Brazil, India, and Mexico in like 48 hours. Our instance was breaking. I didn't even know how to set up the instance properly. It was like a whole nightmare, but we learned, and then we built on top of that, and provided more. And what ended up happening is we have 2 pilot customers, which are lawyers, and they have, they're seeing about 4 immigrants every week from our platform. And that's because we now have this engagement from the immigrant community on the platform. So when a lawyer is tinkering with our software, they're also getting inbound from us, from the platform. And so, and then the strategic partnerships, like, we're in conversations with employers, we're in conversations with service providers in Canada who have other, solutions for employers who can get the H-1B exempt. So like, we've become very strategic partners with everyone working in this space. And I'm just so stoked to be engaging at all these different layers with how to solve this problem, as a systems thinker. Like, that just, makes me so juiced every day.
So I want to dive into actually how the idea for JustiGuide was started. But before I do that, I do want to take a moment to thank the second sponsor of the show, and actually the newest sponsor of the show, Journey. That's JOORNEY. So for those who don't know, Journey is actually the leading provider of business plans for immigration purposes. They partner with immigration lawyers and other global mobility professionals, and they make tailor-made business plans for a bunch of different visa types: EB2 NIWs, E2s, EB5s, L1s, etc. So for the immigration lawyers or folks that work in immigration firms who are listening, if you're working with applicants from really anywhere around the world, U.S., Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Singapore, UAE, etc., and you're sort of working on a case that requires a business plan for their visa, reach out to Journey. They can help you. This is their course. I mean, this is what they were built on. And I've known Journey for a number of years. They've been really supportive of different initiatives that I've put together, conferences and things. They're an awesome firm. they put out a ton of webinars. They put out so much great content in support of the immigration industry. And so for the lawyers out there, if you don't have a business plan partner for your immigration cases, I definitely recommend checking them out. So their website is journey.com, joorney.com. You could see samples of their work. There's pricing, all that information. There's also a link in the show notes to take you directly there. So thank you, Journey, for being the newest sponsor of the show and allowing it to continue to happen.
That's awesome.
On that note, BC, Journey works with a lot of entrepreneurs, right, who really are immigrants starting businesses. I know you didn't come here, I guess, on E2 or some similar visa, but you started a business that now is impacting the immigration industry. At what point did you think to yourself, I've done all of these things, I have business experience, I've gone through the immigration process. What sparked that thought to say, I should build something to make this process better?
Yeah, I think there were two big things. The first one was attending Codex, the Stanford Future Law Conference. And I don't think in my wildest imagination, I did not think that the legal system was failing as much as it was. I thought when I was going through my experience, I was like, okay, I'm probably the only person, I wasn't genius enough. I wasn't a child star. So things didn't work out so perfectly. So, maybe that, but then I was at, the Future Law Conference, and I think Recidiviz was presenting, and I was just shocked. I like all the different fill points from our prison system to the backlog in immigration, and then the spend on immigration and enforcement, but the less spend on the immigration courts. And I think all of that information definitely kept something in my mind that's like, something is not, it's not quite working well. It's working in some ways, and it's working better than most other places in the world, but it definitely could be better. There's a lot of human potential that is being wasted right now, and that kind of stayed in my mind. And then the ML buzz was starting to happen, and again, I've always been tinkering with technology, but I had not kind of taken up coding myself. But I just got really excited, man. Like the moment I was able to interact, I think my first the thing I played with was building a chat bot that was basically responding on my website with quotes to people, as like my booking assistant. And I think as soon as I built that problem just came like flushing into my mind, and I was like, oh my God, imagine the immigrant who is trying to figure out what their next step should be. Imagine the person looking for a lawyer from their home country. And all of that, my experience started pouring into what is now JustiGuide.
Did you try using any of these these sort of generative AI tools just to play around and ask it immigration related questions? I'm just curious. Did you sort of go to ChatGPT and say, all right, here's my situation, what do you think I should do, just to see what it would say?
I think I did. I think that was the first wave of it. The prototype I built was basically prompt engineering. And the original idea was not even as focused on immigration. It was simply pocket lawyer. In fact, I thought the best use cases were going to be, teenagers who are trying to navigate DUIs or something. And I gave it to a bunch of friends, like maybe 25 people. And then because I was, part of Shack 15, this founder community in San Francisco in the Ferry Building, I just found that everyone was asking immigration questions. That was like the most relevant use case to the community I was in. So that kind of started, like, oh, okay, so I just started getting more involved in that specific problem after that. And then, of course, when you're building technology, IP and all of these things, so you kind of start thinking, okay, we kind of have to go away from this, and how do we make what we're building more unique and more relevant? And a lot of the discussions I started having with lawyers, and then the scandals we were hearing with the confabulation of the hallucinations that they were getting with ChatGPT also was like a interesting technical problem to solve, right? Because you're like, oh, like clearly lawyers want to be able to do this work fast, but they can't rely on it. So then of course the interest of, okay, how do you build a better tool using ML that doesn't get them in trouble and is done ethically. So then my whole AI for good, learning and working with engineers and figuring out how do you build ethical legal AI was like a very interesting part of the research and development stage. 6 months of basically having a pipeline of when we prompt something, we give it to the lawyer, they test it out, we give it to an ethicist, and then they come back and say, oh well, but it still has the client's name in this prompt, so how do you solve for that? So we went through that framework of how do we do this thing to protect people, lawyers, and still get the best out of the technology.
So with that, walk me through what is JustiGuide and what does it do today?
Yeah, basically, JustiGuide today helps immigrants with their immigration journey, from finding the lawyer, from knowing the check, what they need to, what they need to do for each immigration path, and finding the right lawyer or collaborator to help them through that journey. We also help them fill their forms accurately. We've simplified the form filling process to, where they can just, the AI engine knows all their personal information that is stored in, again, privately for them, and they can just autofill the forms and they can send that to the lawyer to review. So we've basically shortened the time that immigrants have to deal with preparation and document gathering. And because we did that for immigrants, it does that significantly well also for the lawyers on our platform. And we're able to do the same thing for lawyers. We make it easy for them to do intelligent onboarding. We make it easy for them to translate documents, to get information from USCIS or the government that is relevant, because we're updating every hour from a free law project and USCIS API. And we are, and we also are helping them impact and help more immigrants than they were before JustiGuide. And we're building more to help governments with figuring out which cities should absorb which immigrants, because at the very heart of our first engine, which we provided to consumers, is something that I think could be very useful in the evolution of global mobility, especially 20 years from now, when many people have to move quickly and be contributing in a new place or make a new home for themselves. So we're thinking through that right now.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because I think that's really fascinating, especially coming from your perspective as somebody who studied and worked in urban planning. When you talk about people who are going to have to move quickly in 20 years, I guess you're sort of talking about kind of environmentally based refugees, right? I mean, there's an earthquake, there's another fire, there's this and that, and it just displaces not individual people or families, but towns, cities, large areas. And those people, they have to leave. I mean, there's nowhere for them to go. There's nowhere for them to stay. Where do they go? How do they make that decision? So what are some of your thoughts in general? Maybe not even just about JustiGuide, but in general, what are some of your thoughts, around sort of, climate-based migration that's likely, or that's frankly even starting to happen now to some extent. How do you view that problem?
Yeah, so I mean, as of this year, there's about 117 million forcibly displaced peoples, and the impact of those people are in Europe, Turkey, Germany, Iran. Surprisingly, Uganda has also started to take more people who are in Africa, particularly displaced due to wars. I think the UN is projecting that there'll be about 68.5 billion people displaced by the time we are seeing the big change or the big impact in climate change. Where do they go? People often have to go the direction that feels safe, right? So the next country or the next town or wherever they can go that feels like they're fleeing from that particular danger. I'm not being specific because right now I think there's still conflicting data around which places are going to get impacted first. So I just kind of want to talk to the phenomenon of having to forcibly migrate and what we can do to be better prepared. I think the way that I see that is right now we still talk about unwanted immigrants, refugees, and what happens is, you know, people come up with a charter, we come up with a temporary protected status like we're doing for Ukrainians and Haitians, and you know, in Germany there's like a fast accelerated visa. But I think that the amount of people is going to be so much that even you're not going to be able to hire enough people to process that paperwork. You're not going to have enough personnel. So this is where, in my mind, having technologies that are kind of preparing for this imminent danger really is going to be so vital. Because what ends up happening with catastrophes is we will prepare for them, but we don't prepare for them enough. But what we're seeing with the way the US is spending, if I was to use that data set in how I'm thinking about the problem, is we end up spending way more, and that money doesn't end up actually dealing with the problem in a way that will feel that, oh, we've actually invested the amount of capital that we have. So in my mind, what governments can do is to prepare for this post border community of workers where people can come in, work, get their visas quickly so that they can start paying taxes into those places, so that there's no loss of wisdom or knowledge, and even the financial contribution of that immigrant to the place that absorbs them. We see that a lot in the US. People come here as a student. By the time they're getting their PhD, they're now in Canada, and they were never in a status in the US to where they paid property taxes or anything like that. So governments being aware that when people come and contribute, that's valuable, and finding a way to keep them in that place can be very important. And so I think, to answer the question succinctly, is that I think about the problem in three ways. I would say government preparation. So how do they plan and prepare? And then the data sets that actually allow them to quantify where the labor should go, I think could be very useful. And then I think finally is thinking about the economic impact. Like, how can we make that absorption actually be a profit economically, which it often is. But again, I think it gets lost in translation. So like preparing and staggering those responses would be kind of that would feel like we're prepared.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm even just straight up picturing hundreds of thousands of people moving together away from fires, floods, famine, etc. And the neighboring country. I mean, what do? You have to sort of let people in. You can't even ask them to turn around because there's nothing to turn around to.
Exactly.
I mean, it's a little bit of a dramatic example, but if that's the case, what does a country do? Assuming borders still continue to exist and to be enforced, which I think they will. What does a country do to, kind of somewhat humanely, at least, deal with hundreds of thousands of people trying to cross at any given time? I know that could sound similar to maybe the experience of the southern United States, where we have the border with Mexico, and there are people coming in not from Mexico often, but often from further deeper into Central South America. Many
Mhm.
people come from other parts of the world. I definitely understand it, but at least it's not like Mexico is ablaze, and you can't. I don't have any solutions to the southern border issue, and I'm not saying that I do, but at the very least there's no major. They can still physically turn around in theory, and try. There are maybe attempts to resettle somewhere else, but in the event that just Mexico is on fire, again, theoretically this is
Mhm.
completely on fire. What does a country like the United States do? How do we handle all these people? You need to process them, you need to know who they are, document them, etc. So I definitely agree with you in the sense that as that becomes more and more common, and as whether you agree with it or not, but as turning people around becomes less actually feasible, we need to leverage technology to be able to deal with these
Absolutely.
kind of crises. Um,
Absolutely. And imagine if everything is already, their information is already in the system. And now, instead of stopping them to check them when they're in such dire conditions, we can just be feeding them and starting to, like, oh, these people need to go to Montana. Let's set them up, go there. There's already housing. We're transforming these hotels that are slowly losing, their capacity because most people are working remotely. So it's like I think there's so much in urban renewal, and when we think about actually changing use of places and spaces, and I think there's a lot. If we think about it from a optimistic, I know it's not an optimistic situation, but I think my optimism lies in the human capacity to problem solve, and I think that there will be solutions as far as we're prepared. And I think that that's where it's hard to prepare for something that we've never experienced before, and that's why we want to keep letting people know that this conversation of global mobility and forcibly displaced individuals is not something that nonprofits will be able to handle by themselves, because that's kind of how it's kind of set up right now, right? It's mostly nonprofits that bear the brunt of the work, but I think governments and all of us will be impacted. So how do we make that concern known, and how do we make sure the government is not only thinking about the lip service of enforcement, because we're also seeing that that spend is imbalanced and it's not actually, we have 2 million applications backlogged in the US, and we've spent over 30 billion this year on on DHS and ICE enforcement officers, but it's like the court system is significantly lacking personnel to process the paperwork, and the paperwork also, some of these people didn't have support filing it. So 80% of some of these asylum cases, even though they're valid, will be rejected. So how do you solve for those, those inefficiencies in the system? Because human lives are at stake. And that's why I, stepped into this business. It's really the big question here is human lives, human potential.
Yeah, it's a really interesting conversation. And in terms of federal spend, I don't know. I mean, different departments have different budgets. So, uh, and to be fair, I'm not sure where the budget for immigration judicial system comes into play, and if that is part of or not part of, the DHS CBP budget. But nevertheless, the point is maybe there's a way to reallocate, and certainly there's a way for technology to come in and support the process.
Yeah.
I'm curious, as we kind of wrap up here, I'm curious from the perspective of JustiGuide. You kind of mentioned that you support individuals with their by allowing them to get more information, find an attorney, fill their forms, and you're also supporting law firms. So who is your sort of target? If I'm talking to somebody right now, who do I tell go to JustiGuide and check it out? Is it an immigration lawyer? And if so, how? Is it an individual looking for immigration, a visa? If so, how?
Yeah, I think we are not the only solution for the immigrant who is looking for help, but we are definitely the most accessible solution in that the day you log into the platform, you can get the information readily and you can connect to a legal service provider to help you with your immigration problem that same day. I mean, this week has just been an amazing testament to that. We've had people who are stranded because they got hired on L2 and didn't know where to go. And the day they came on the platform, they got connected to one of our service providers. They are now processing a new job that they got, and it's smooth. So yes, we want to be that place for immigrants, because we not only provide legal assistance, we also have databases on housing. So again, everything that I needed as an immigrant, I've tried to build into this solution. For lawyers, again, for us, it's the lawyers are coming as service providers to help this community of immigrants. And what we're doing there is exploring how to make it easy for lawyers, the 53,000 immigration lawyers, which is, just under resourced compared to the 1.3 million other lawyers that have to process, over 160 million people trying to come into this country. So for us, it's we're putting technology at the bottlenecks of these situations. So yeah, we we do collect money from lawyers. We do collect money from immigrants. We're more affordable for immigrants who are still exploring their options. And so, yeah, those are our primary customers right now.
So what kind of I mean, if I'm just trying to
Immigration
understand.
lawyers.
I'm just trying to understand it from the perspective of if I'm an immigration lawyer listening to this, what do I get out of this? Am I getting the matching in a marketplace? Am I getting a tool that allows me to manage cases and see people's profiles? Am I getting a communication platform? Kind of what am I, what's the
Yeah, yeah.
pitch here?
Got you. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying. Yeah, for lawyers, yeah, the lead generation is amazing. Some of our proprietary technology, again, like I said, we built this ML system to be something that they can confidently rely on. And it's quoting its sources. It makes it easy for them to communicate with their clients. And also the whole form experience, we've really taken the friction away from that, where they're able to collaborate with their clients and fill these forms and intelligently onboard them. So literally, we save the lawyer a lot of effort and a lot of spend on each client with our platform.
Gotcha. Interesting. Okay. And then for individuals, the ideal individual sort of has immigration questions. They don't have an immigration lawyer. They can go and effectively, sign up for, on JustiGuide, and then ask questions and get connected to one of the lawyers that uses your platform.
Yes, exactly. We have a recommendation system and we have a database of over 180 lawyers. We definitely prioritize lawyers that are on our platform, but we do out of network as well. Once those lawyers are, yeah, once they're, their hands are full, we just want to get them help.
Very cool. Very cool. And I guess my final question would be, from a perspective of artificial, from an AI perspective, what's the sort of, how does it come into play? I mean, is it the answering of questions? Is it helping for the immigrant? Is it helping with research for the lawyer? Like, how does that come into play from the product standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, it is that we're entering an agentic aspect of AI. And so what that means is that you have these systems that are reasoning and kind of helping you. So we think about it that, as an immigrant, you're like, a lot of what happens for immigrants today is they want to call somebody and have them walk through, and I think the service that we're providing, especially for immigrants who might not have access to a computer, or immigrants who are fleeing danger again, like having this system that they can either call or log into and start getting real time updates from that system, I think is super useful to the immigrant. I think also filling forms can be very daunting. And when you're filling a form, you're just intimidated by it. You're looking at something that sometimes you have no clue, like what is a social security number? Can I submit this form without that? Those simple questions, you don't need to call your lawyer for it. Our assistant is our form assistant is right there. You can translate elements of the form. You can go back and forth with your testing the evidence that you've written and seeing if that works, and it can help you reframe it. It can take the way that you've said in your language, and we've validated that it does those translations really well. So I think for the immigrant, it's really all the little things after speaking to your lawyer that you still have to do on your own that can make you better prepared. And for the lawyer, I think it's very similar in this day and age. Things are changing fast, so to have a system that is getting updated every hour with the most relevant information when they're doing legal research. I know a lot of people still pay for Westlaw and DocketWise, and so we've tried to, for the lawyer, give them a comprehensive tool that can save them money in the long run, right? So instead of spending on all these different platforms, we can definitely just spend money on ours and still get the basics of processing immigration paperwork done on and research done on the platform.
So if you're on that note, if you're willing or able to share, where are you guys? For example, Westlaw, they have access to just tons of case law and statutory language, regulatory language. So are you
Yeah.
guys pulling from primary sources or
Yeah.
where can the lawyer who's using JustiGuide expect that information to come from?
Yeah, it's the Free Law and Court Listener Project. So that's a nonprofit that basically archives every like case that goes through any court in the U.S. It has an API. We've got to talk to them. We're friends with them. We get that information. So where there are certain libraries that are actually creating only immigration focused cases. But right now it uses that API to help the lawyer when they're preparing for a case, like what don't I know, or when has this happened in history. So it's basically researching that library, but we are gonna get more specific to immigration, just because right now it's a lot of data that we're saving to make that happen. Yeah,
Got it. Yeah, no, it's important because, like you said, if anybody who's using AI, whether it's the attorney or the individual, they need to know that the answers they're getting are based on information that is not made up. It's based
yeah,
on information that's true and correct and exists in the world. I think
exactly,
that's super important because one of the biggest challenges is the hallucinations. It may not happen often, but if it happens at all, it's spooks people, and it adds risk, right? So the question is
exactly.
always, how do we get rid of that so that we're always absolutely sure that the information we're getting is correct and true and real? Um,
Exactly. And that's one of the reasons we, even when we were building Relo, still felt the need to keep lawyers in the loop.
Definitely.
Because yes, technology is, we've done everything now and we have better tooling. We even have a AI governance layer. So it's now super proofed. But in the beginning, we didn't have that. And so there was like a constant like making sure, anybody who was a legal partner could verify that, before it went out to our clients. And so, yeah, it's at the core of what we're doing is solving that problem.
so I guess as my final question, what are you guys working on now? What are you looking forward to, with JustiGuide?
Yeah, we're very excited. I think we rolled out our $99 package this week for immigrants, and this is to give them unlimited consultation. So, one of the things that we heard is that, yeah, you want to talk to one lawyer, but sometimes you want to talk to a few before you make a decision. And that could easily rack up, if you're paying consultation fees. And so, we gave people a bundle where they can have access to unlimited consultations. The next big thing that we're doing is around that database, the visual one I was telling you about, to prepare government for absorbing immigrants. So we're really excited about building that. And on the lawyer dashboard side, we're implementing the vision model so that we can basically automate a lot of their own tasks so that the AI learns how they like to do things and can support them in their practice.
Very cool. I like I like the fact that you're also working with governments or attempting to, because that's a challenge. City
Yeah.
government, state government, local, it doesn't matter. It's a challenge. But if we can have changes implemented on the kind of government side, that always trickles down to what we do as professionals and ultimately to the immigrants. So I think that's huge. So
Thank you.
rooting for you there.
Thank you so
Um,
much. Thank you so
well,
much.
well, thank you, BC. This was really interesting, and thanks for sharing your background and your thoughts on this. And I'm glad we talked about climate change induced immigration, because that's not a very hot topic, no pun
Yeah,
intended, yet, but it will be. It will be.
absolutely.
So hopefully I'll continue to have these conversations. So
A-
thank you so much for being here. I
Absolutely.
appreciate it.
R- Roman, you're amazing. And please, I loved your facilitation. I really hope you could be a part of Navigate Summit next year and lead a few conversations. Thank you so much.
Of course. All right. Thank you, BC.
Thank
Appreciate it.
you.
What a great conversation. Thank you, everybody, for joining, for being here. Thank you for the comments. Really exciting. And, it's, again, cool to see so many, great tools coming out that are really based on AI as the foundation, and, are rethinking the way that immigration lawyers do their work, are rethinking the way that immigrants interact with the legal industry. And then if there can be some impact on the government, I think that would be um, really a game changer too. Perhaps we start at the local level and then make our way up to the federal level. And with the upcoming, depending on when you're listening to this, with the incoming Trump administration starting 2025 that was presenting certain challenges to the immigration industry, both for humanitarian, family-based, and even for employment-based immigration. Let's see if there may be some potential for the government to implement new tech. For better or worse, the more technology we have, I think probably the more streamlined things will be. So fingers crossed for a positive 2025 and beyond from an immigration standpoint. Until then, again, thank you everybody for being here and supporting the show, for your comments and likes, and thank you for sharing it with your friends and colleagues too. See you guys next week, and of course, in the meantime, I hope you all stay safe, and peace out. Oh, we have a question here from Jackie asking, is there a way to listen after the fact and join too late? Yes, this is recorded, so you can go and listen on LinkedIn, you can listen on Facebook, or YouTube. So reach out to me, I'll send you the information. So thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Peace out.